If your last name is on this list, your ancestors weren't farmers. They were the most feared raiders in Britain, a people so lawless that two separate kings tried to wipe them off the map, and the only reason you exist is that they were impossible to kill. 10 surnames. And if you carry one of these names in Tennessee, in the Carolinas, in West Virginia, or Kentucky, you already know you're Scots-Irish. What you don't know is that Scots-Irish is a polite word for something much wilder. Your people weren't Highlanders. They weren't really Irish. They were border people, raiders and riders off the most violent frontier in Europe, dumped into Ulster, squeezed by landlords and the law, and finally shipped across an ocean where they took one look at a wall of mountains and built the most stubborn culture in America. Stay until number 1, because that name was hunted by a king, hanged by the dozen, and deported across the sea, and it still ended up on the surface of the moon. Number 10. Boyd. Lowland Ayrshire, the green farming country in the southwest of Scotland that fed the whole plantation. The Boyds were one of the families the crown moved into Ulster to hold the land, and here's why your name matters more than you think. In the spring of 1718, a Presbyterian minister named William Boyd carried a petition across the Atlantic, signed by hundreds of Ulster families asking the governor of Massachusetts for a place to land. That document cracked the door open. The flood that followed, 250,000 of your people over the next 60 years, came through the door a Boyd helped push open. So if you're a Boyd, your bloodline didn't just join the Great Migration. It started it. Number 9. Hamilton. Lowland again, and this is the name that built the whole thing. In 1606, 3 years before the official plantation even began, a Scot named James Hamilton got his hands on the land of an Irish chief named Con O'Neill in County Down, and started shipping in lowland Scots by the boatload. Everything that became Ulster Scots, the language, the Presbyterian Church, the entire transplanted world your ancestors carried to America, traces back to that first private land grab. The Hamiltons were the architects. If your name is Hamilton, your people didn't wander into this story. They drew the map. Now the founders are out of the way, because the next 8 names are where it gets dangerous. These are the riding families, the Border Reivers, and if one of them is yours, do me a favor and subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors right now, because the deeper we go down this list, the more wanted your bloodline was. Number 8. Kerr, or Carr, after the spelling wore down. Off the Scottish Middle March, one of the leading raiding families on the entire border, and one of the most active reiving names in the records. The Kerrs were so notorious as fighters that left-handedness in the borders got its own name because of them. To this day, Scots will call a left-handed person Kerr-handed or Corey-fisted. The legend says the family trained to fight with the left hand to throw off a right-handed enemy, and that they built their castle stair at Ferniehurst to spiral the wrong way so a left-handed Kerr could swing free, while an attacker climbing up was jammed against the wall. Historians argue about the staircase. Nobody argues about the reputation, a family so associated with the fighting hand that they put a word in the language. The Kerrs raided, feuded, and served as wardens of the march, lawmen and outlaws in the same generation. When the border was crushed, they scattered into Ulster and on to the colonies. If you're a Kerr, your blood comes from people whose violence is literally baked into how Scots still speak. Number 7. Graham. And the Grahams are where you see exactly what the Crown thought of these families. After James VI of Scotland became James I of England in 1603, he inherited both sides of the border at once, and he decided the riding families were an embarrassment he wanted gone. The Grahams were singled out by name. Their lands were seized, their leaders rounded up, and hundreds of them were forcibly shipped to Ireland and forbidden to come back. not invited. Deported. The king of two countries looked at the Graham name and decided the only solution was to physically remove it from the island. It didn't work, of course. They put down roots in Ulster, waited out a generation, and then crossed the Atlantic on their own terms. If you're a Graham, your bloodline was so feared that a king tried to exile it out of existence. And here it is anyway. Number 6. Montgomery. Back to the lowland founders for one beat, because the Montgomerys are tied to the most haunting near miss in the whole story. Hugh Montgomery was Hamilton's partner, the other half of the 1606 settlement that started Ulster-Scotland. But here's the part that stops people cold. In 1636, a group of Ulster Presbyterians, fed up already, built a ship called the Eagle Wing and set sail for America, more than a century before the Great Migration. They got partway across the Atlantic. Then the storms hit, brutal ones, and beat them back to Ireland. They took it as a sign from God and stayed. Think about that. Your people tried to leave for the New World 100 years early, and the ocean itself said no. If you're a Montgomery, your bloodline was reaching for America before America was ready for it. If you've found your name yet, you already know this list isn't flattering, and that's exactly why it's true. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because the next 4 names are the ones with blood on them, starting with the single longest feud in border history. Number 5. Johnstone. Johnston, Johnson, however it came down to you. A West March raiding family, and the carriers of the bloodiest grudge on the entire frontier, the feud with the Maxwells. It ran for generations. It peaked in 1593 at a place called Dryfe Sands, near Lockerbie, where the Maxwells came with around 2,000 men and the Johnstones had a few hundred. It should have been a slaughter. It was, just not the way anyone expected. The outnumbered Johnstones cut the Maxwell force to pieces, killed their chief, and left so many men dead with a single downward sword stroke to the head that the move got its own name. They still call it the Lockerbie Lick. If you're a Johnstone, your bloodline won a fight it had no business winning, against a family it hated for 100 years. And if your name is Maxwell, you already felt that one land. Tell me in the comments which side you're on, because I promise the other side is reading this right now. Number 4. Scott. One of the most powerful riding families on the whole border, raiders and wardens both. The name so woven into the frontier that the greatest chronicler of the Reivers, Sir Walter Scott, came from the line himself and wrote their ballads down before they vanished. The Scots feuded with the Kerrs for decades, a grudge that ran so hot it ended with a Scot laird assassinated on the high street of Edinburgh. They rode the Middle March, and they were strong enough that the crown had to deal with them as a power, not a nuisance. When the border was broken and the families pushed to Ulster, the Scots went with them, and the name poured into the American backcountry. If you're a Scot, your bloodline was powerful enough that history hired one of its own to write the legend down. Number 3. Nixon. A Liddesdale name, and Liddesdale was the worst of it, the single most lawless valley on a lawless border, the raiding heartland the wardens themselves were afraid to ride into. The Nixons rode with the Armstrongs and the Elliots in that valley, and the 3 names turn up together again and again in the complaints, the raids, the hangings. When the crown finally came down on Liddesdale, families like the Nixons were scattered into Ulster, and from there into the mountains of America, where that same clannish, trust-no-outsider valley culture became the backbone of Appalachia. If your name is Nixon, your people came out of the most dangerous ground on the border, and they brought its rules with them. Number 2. Elliot. Liddesdale again, one of the great riding clans, and a name that fought the Scots and rode beside the Armstrongs through the bloodiest decades the frontier ever saw. The Elliots were raiders of the first rank, the kind of family the word reiver was invented to describe, and they paid for it when the border was crushed, lands lost, leaders killed or driven out, the survivors pushed across to Ulster. But the name didn't soften, and it didn't disappear. It crossed the ocean and dug into the southern mountains, and the Elliots are thick on the ground in Appalachia today. If you're an Elliot, your bloodline rode in the most feared company on the border and outlasted the empire that tried to break it. And now, number 1. This name wasn't just feared. It was hunted by one king, deported by another, hanged in batches as a warning to everyone else, and it still refused to die. What survived because the Armstrongs were simply impossible to erase. Number 1. Armstrong, the most powerful and most feared riding family on the entire Anglo-Scottish border. At their height, the Armstrongs could put thousands of riders in the saddle, and they answered to no crown, English or Scottish. They held Liddesdale. And the crown's response to that power tells you everything. In 1530, the King of Scotland, James V, summoned the Armstrong chief, Johnny Armstrong of Gilnockie, to a meeting under a written promise of safe conduct, and then hanged him and his men on the spot, with no trial. It was treachery, plain and naked, and the border never forgot it. They were still singing ballads about it 3 centuries later. Then came James VI, who singled the Armstrongs out by name alongside the Grahams and had them forcibly deported to Fermanagh in Ireland, trying to break the name by scattering it across the sea. And from that exile, from Ulster, the Armstrongs joined the Great Migration to America, carried their feuds and their fierce independence into the Appalachian Mountains, and built lives no king could reach. 2 kings tried to erase this bloodline. One hanged its chief under a flag of truce, one deported the whole family, and more than 400 years later, a descendant of that hunted border name, Neil Armstrong, was the first human being to set foot on the moon. If your name is Armstrong, your blood was declared too dangerous to exist by 2 separate crowns, survived the rope and the exile and the ocean, and left the first footprint on another world. 10 names. 10 riding families and founders, off the most violent frontier in Europe, through the Plantation, through the rack rents and the penal laws that squeezed your people out of Ulster, and across an ocean into the southern mountains, where a hard, clannish, ungovernable people looked at the Appalachians and finally found a frontier that fit them. The feuds came with them. The loyalty came with them. The refusal to be ruled came with them. It's why the mountains are the way they are. It's why your family is the way it is. Your name isn't just a name, it's a riding clan, a raided valley, a deportation order, a crossing your people survived when 2 kings wanted them gone. They tried to hang these names. They tried to exile these names. And here they are, on a mountain and ocean away from the border that made them, still being carried, still being spoken, still refusing to be tamed. So drop your surname in the comments and tell me which border family your blood comes from. And if you know the real story, the valley, the feud, the ship, the holler your people finally settled in, tell that too, because those stories die when nobody says them. Subscribe to Blame Your Ancestors. Every week we go deeper into the names people carry without ever knowing what they survived. The next bloodline's already waiting.